The train had already gone when the wind came back through Copper Bend Depot, scattering dust and the faint scent of coal. The year was 1877, and the late sun slid low behind the red hills, throwing long shadows across the cracked boards of the platform. Annabel Gray stood alone beside a trunk scuffed from the miles between Boston and here, her gloves creased tight around a folded letter. The station agent was locking the office, his keys jingling against the door. The whistle that had carried her last hope was only a faint cry in the distance now. She told herself she wasn't afraid, but her voice, if she'd spoken aloud, would have betrayed her. She had been promised a meeting, a name, a new beginning. Instead, there was only the emptiness of a western evening and the taste of dust at the back of her throat. Behind her, the telegraph line hummed, carrying words that never seemed to reach her. Somewhere far from this place, a man named Nathan Hale had written of marriage, of a life among the open fields. She could still see his handwriting, careful, certain, but promises fade faster than ink in the sun, and the paper in her hand felt colder now than the wind itself. The station master, an old man with weary eyes, shifted his weight. "Miss, there ain't another eastbound till morning," he said. "You best find a room in town." His words were kind enough, but he didn't wait for an answer. He turned the key, tipped his hat, and left her with the sound of his boots echoing down the empty platform. Annabel lifted her chin. Somewhere beyond the depot fence, a dog barked once, then fell silent. She had never been this far west before. The horizon stretched endlessly, a place without edges or certainty. She thought of her mother's voice that last night in Boston. "Be careful what you chase, Anna. The West doesn't always give back what it takes." A low rumble drew her from the memory, the sound of hooves slowing to a walk. A man rode up from the road, his silhouette carved against the burnished light. His hat brim cast a shadow that hid most of his face, but the line of his shoulders spoke of someone used to long miles and harder days. Dust clung to his coat, the color of the land itself. "Evening, ma'am," he said, his tone quiet but sure. "Looks like you've been waiting on someone." Annabel hesitated. The polite words she meant to find refused to come. "I was," she finally managed. "He isn't coming." The rider dismounted. The step he took toward her stirred the dust again. His eyes, dark as river silt, studied her without judgment, only calm understanding. "I reckon that happens," he said. "Trains leave folk behind, sometimes on purpose, sometimes not." She pressed the letter between her palms. "It's nothing," she murmured. "I'll be fine." The man nodded once as if to let her keep her pride. "Name's Elias Booker," he said. "My sister runs a place in town, Juniper House. Decent food, a roof that doesn't leak. I'll ride you there if you like." She wanted to refuse, to cling to the last shred of control she had, but the dusk was settling fast, and the road to town looked lonelier than her own thoughts. "Thank you," she said softly. Elias turned toward the office door and knocked once. "One ticket east," he told the station master who reappeared, "for the morning train." He paid in silence, then handed the slip of paper to Annabel. She stared at it, unsure what it meant. For him to buy her way home without asking her story, without asking anything at all. "You don't owe me," he said before she could speak. "Keep it, in case tomorrow feels different." The faintest smile touched his mouth, gone as quickly as it came. He lifted her trunk as if it weighed nothing, set it on his horse's pack. The evening wind carried the scent of rain now, and when she looked west, the sky had turned the color of old pewter. They walked together on the quiet road toward town, the rhythmic clop of the horse between them, like a slow, steady heartbeat. Annabel glanced once over her shoulder. The depot stood empty under the rising moon, the ticket still trembling in her hand. Behind them, a single drop of rain struck the wooden platform, spreading dark against the dry boards. Elias looked up at the clouds and said, almost to himself, "Water's coming early this year." Annabel didn't answer. She only held the ticket tighter, feeling the faint pulse of fear and something unnamed rising beneath it. Something that felt a little like the beginning of trust. The night gathered around them, soft and uncertain, and the first rumble of thunder rolled low across the hills, as if warning or promise, she couldn't yet tell. Rain came soft through the night, not in storms, but in quiet, steady breaths that slicked the dust into dark earth. By the time they reached town, the lamps along Red Willow's main street had been lit. Warm squares of yellow behind windows fogged with supper steam. Elias led his horse to a hitching post outside a wide two-story building with a painted sign that read, "Juniper House." The scent of bread drifted through the open doorway. Inside, the air held that hush particular to a house where work and kindness live side by side. A woman in a dark blue apron looked up from wiping a counter. "You're late, brother," she said, the corners of her mouth curving, though her tone pretended to scold. "And you've brought a stray." "This is Miss Gray," Elias answered. "She missed her train." Zora Booker studied Annabel with quick, intelligent eyes, the kind that saw more than words ever told. "Then she's found the right place," she said simply. "There's stew on the stove and a dry room upstairs." Annabel wanted to say she would pay, that she wasn't a burden, but Zora had already turned toward the kitchen. "Eat first," she called over her shoulder. "The rest can wait till morning." The table was set with chipped white plates and a single candle burning low. Annabel sat stiffly, hands folded in her lap, aware of the rain whispering against the roof. Across from her, Elias removed his hat and brushed the damp from its brim. He didn't talk, and the silence wasn't cruel. It was the kind that leaves room for someone else to breathe. She ate slowly, the food thick and comforting. Each spoonful seemed to steady her heartbeat. In Boston, every supper had been measured by manners and conversation. Here there was only quiet and the sound of the fire. When she finished, Elias rose. "Zora'll show you the room," he said. "I'll see to the horse." "Thank you," she murmured. He only nodded, pulling his coat tighter as he stepped into the rain again. Upstairs, the hallway smelled faintly of soap and cedar. Zora opened a door at the end. Inside was a narrow bed, a washstand, and a small window that looked down on the street. A lantern glowed low beside the door, its light soft as breath. "There's hot water if you need it," Zora said. "You can stay as long as you like. No questions tonight." "You're kind." Annabel managed a small smile. Zora shrugged. "Kindness is just another kind of work out here." She paused, then added softly, "My brother doesn't bring many people home. That's reason enough for me to keep the light on." When she was alone, Annabel unlatched her trunk. Inside were the few things she had carried across the miles: a folded shawl, her father's worn book of music, a small photograph of her mother, and the letter from Nathan, creased, empty, meaningless now. She touched the sheet once, then tucked it beneath the lining. For a long while she stood by the window. The street below was quiet except for the occasional creak of a sign in the wind. Across the way, the blacksmith's forge glowed like a coal in the dark. Somewhere down the road, a dog barked, then settled. She thought of the piano she had left behind in Boston, the sound of it filling a house already half sold. Her father's hands had once guided hers across the keys, patient and proud. He used to say, "Music is breath turned into light." Since his death, she hadn't played for anyone. She didn't know if she could again. The door clicked softly. Micah, the boy she had glimpsed earlier, stood barefoot in the hall, holding something in his palm. He said nothing, just reached out and placed it on the edge of her trunk. A horse's tail hair, bound with a thread of blue. Then he vanished as quietly as he'd come. Annabel sat on the bed, holding the small token between her fingers. It was smooth and strong, the color of river smoke. Outside, thunder rolled far away, fading over the hills. She wondered who this family was, this man who bought a stranger's ticket home, this woman who offered shelter without question, this child who gave a gift for no reason at all. When she finally lay down, the lantern flickered low. The house creaked as if settling around her, protective, steady. Through the window, the rain fell softer now, each drop a heartbeat against the sill. Annabel closed her eyes and whispered into the dark, as if the walls might understand. "I don't know if I'll use that ticket." No one answered. Only the wind moved through the juniper trees outside, carrying a faint scent of green and something distant, something like the start of belonging. And somewhere beyond the rooftops, a single light glimmered where the station lay empty, as though the night itself hadn't quite let go of her story. Dawn broke quiet and pale over Red Willow. Mist hung low in the hollows, and the air smelled of wet cedar and ash from the night's fires. Annabel woke before the rooster called, startled by how soft the silence felt. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The narrow bed, the scent of soap, the steady patter of rain sliding off the roof. Then the memory returned. The depot, the ticket, the man with the steady eyes who said she didn't owe him anything. Downstairs, the kitchen murmured with early life. Zora moved easily between stove and counter, humming a tune that reminded Annabel of church mornings back east. "Coffee's on," Zora said when she saw her. "He's out back already. Elias never sleeps late, not when there's light to use." Annabel sipped from the mug she was handed. The warmth traveled through her fingers and deeper, like courage she hadn't known she still had. When she stepped outside, the yard was washed clean, the world still half gray. Elias stood by the corral, sleeves rolled, talking low to a horse that shifted its weight nervously. The animal was a beautiful dappled mare with a white blaze across her nose. One leg bore an old wound, the hair grown uneven where the scar ran deep. She tossed her head, ears flicking back as Annabel drew near. "This one's called Bluebell," Elias said. "Found her caught in a barbed fence last spring. Took her months to stand easy again." Annabel watched the mare breathe, the quick rise and fall of her ribs. "Does she trust anyone?" Elias shook his head slightly. "She's trying, but some hurts run quiet and long." His gaze lifted to Annabel's, steady and unreadable. "You can't force trust. You can only wait alongside it." Annabel moved closer to the fence. The boards were damp beneath her gloved hand. Bluebell turned an ear toward her, but didn't flinch away. "She's beautiful," Annabel said. "She's strong," Elias corrected softly. "Beauty's just the surface. Strength's what keeps her breathing." The mare's dark eye met Annabel's. For a heartbeat, something inside her settled, the same fragile stillness that comes when two frightened creatures recognize each other. She lifted her hand a little, palm open. Bluebell's nostrils flared, breath warm against her skin. Then the horse stepped back, tail flicking. Elias smiled faintly. "That's more than she gives most folks." Annabel exhaled, realizing she'd been holding her breath. "I didn't do anything." "You breathed calm," he said. "Sometimes that's all a body needs to start again." The sun slid higher, touching the wet boards with gold. Elias tightened the saddle on his horse and turned toward the gate. "I'll ride to the depot. Morning train'll be in soon. You coming along?" Annabel looked toward the road, still slick with rain, and the thought of the ticket pressed like a stone in her pocket. "I suppose I should," she said quietly. They rode in silence, the town waking around them, smoke curling from chimneys, a milk wagon rattling over the boards. The depot appeared ahead, small and lonely against the wide sky. The whistle could already be heard in the distance, a thin cry winding through the morning air. Elias handed her the ticket from his pocket, the paper dry and crisp despite the damp air. "You've got a place waiting east," he said, "or maybe just a ghost of one. Either way, the train'll take you there." Annabel looked down the tracks. The horizon shimmered with light, but it felt far away, unreachable. She thought of Zora's warm kitchen, of the boy's quiet gift, of Bluebell's trembling breath. "And if I stay?" she asked. Elias adjusted the reins in his hand. "Then the land will make room for you. It always does, when someone means to belong." The train came into view, iron and steam and noise tearing through the calm. Annabel stepped toward the platform, her heart drumming fast. The conductor called, "All aboard!" Her fingers tightened around the ticket until it creased. The engine's heat rolled over her, the scent of metal and coal thick in the air. She looked at the open car door. the step gleaming wet. Beyond it waited everything she thought she had wanted: distance, safety, forgetfulness. But the idea of leaving felt heavier than staying. Elias said nothing. He only touched the brim of his hat and waited, the patience in his stance like a quiet promise. The whistle screamed once more. Steam burst white into the morning. Annabel's pulse slowed. She folded the ticket once, twice, slipped it into her coat, and turned from the train. When she looked up, Elias was watching her with that same calm gravity, rain glinting on the brim of his hat. "Guess I'll show you the long way back," he said. Annabel nodded. The train's roar faded down the tracks, carrying away the life she no longer wanted. Behind them, Bluebell whinnied from the corral far off at Juniper House, as if calling her name across the morning. The sky cleared a little, light spilling through the clouds in soft bands. Annabel felt something loosen inside her, a thread of breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding for years. And as they walked back toward town, her boots sinking lightly in the damp earth, the sound of the departing train faded into silence, leaving only the faint rhythm of hooves beside her, and a single question echoing in her chest. What if this was where the journey truly began? By noon, the air had turned clear and bright, the kind of brightness that made everything feel newly washed. Annabel walked beside Elias down Red Willow's main street, her boots still damp from the morning rain. The town was small, but not unkind. Whitewashed storefronts with painted signs, the smell of fresh lumber and bread, a church bell chiming somewhere uphill. They passed the tailor's shop, the general store, a post office no bigger than a shed. People nodded to Elias as he went by. Some smiled. Others only watched from behind their windows. It wasn't hostility exactly, more the cautious curiosity of a place that took its time trusting strangers. Annabel kept her chin level, the folded train ticket a steady weight in her coat pocket. When they reached Juniper House again, Zora was out front sweeping the steps, a kerchief tied around her hair. She looked up, reading the answer in Annabel's eyes before a word was spoken. "You stayed," she said. Annabel smiled faintly. "For now." Zora leaned on her broom, eyes warm but sharp. "For now's how most things worth keeping begin." Inside, the midday light slanted through the dining room windows. A few boarders were finishing lunch. Miners, a schoolteacher, a widow sewing by the fire. Annabel slipped quietly among them, absorbing the murmur of voices and the comfort of ordinary noise. Later, in the small parlor, Zora laid a ledger on the table. "If you're set on earning your keep, I could use help with the accounts. The town's growing, and the books have grown tangled." Annabel traced a finger down the page, reading the careful columns of numbers. "I can manage that," she said. "My father taught me when he still kept his music shop." Then it settled. Zora closed the ledger and studied her. "There's one more thing. The church is short a hand teaching piano to the children on Thursdays. You play?" Annabel hesitated, the question touching something tender. "I used to," she said finally, "before my father passed." "Then you still can." Zora's tone left no room for argument. You'll find the old upright in the back hall, dusty but sound. That afternoon, Annabel found the piano. Its varnish was cracked, keys yellowed from sun and time. When she lifted the lid, the faint scent of oak and age filled the air. She pressed a single note. The sound wavered, then settled, thin but honest, like a voice long unused. She sat there for a long while, letting her hands rest where memory guided them. She didn't play, not yet. The silence between notes felt safer, but something inside her stirred. The faint rustle of a door opening where none had been for years. As evening approached, Elias returned from his rounds, the scent of horses and rain still on him. He stood at the doorway of the parlor, watching her with quiet respect. "Didn't catch the train then," he said. "I didn't," she answered. He nodded once, almost smiling. "Good." They didn't speak again for a while. The light dimmed. Zora called for supper. A boy's laughter echoed from the yard. When Annabel rose from the piano, Elias stepped aside to let her pass, his hand brushing the door frame where her shoulder had just been. The small, ordinary closeness of it made her breath catch. At dinner, the talk turned to the coming Founder's Day celebration. Zora described the bunting she'd sewn, the races planned, the brass band from up north. The school teacher, Mrs. Dunn, asked Annabel if she'd attend. "I don't know," Annabel said. "Crowds aren't my comfort." Elias looked up from his plate. "They can be noisy," he agreed, "but there's always a quiet corner if you need one." Zora smiled knowingly. "He means by the bandstand. He always ends up there keeping an eye on Micah during the speeches." "Then maybe I'll stand nearby," Annabel replied softly, almost surprising herself. After supper, she helped clear the dishes, her movements growing familiar with the rhythm of the house. The scrape of chairs, the hiss of the lantern, Zora's humming in the kitchen. Outside, the sky darkened to violet, and the scent of wet juniper drifted through the open door. Later, when the others had gone to their rooms, Annabel stepped out onto the porch. The moon hung low over the plains, pale and swollen. She reached into her pocket and unfolded the train ticket one last time. The paper was creased, edges soft from handling. She watched the candlelight inside flicker through the thin sheet, then tore it gently in two. The sound was small, but it seemed to echo through her chest. From somewhere down the street came the faint thud of a drum, a rehearsal for the celebration, she guessed. Each beat carried on the cool air like a summons. She leaned against the porch rail, listening until the sound faded into night. Behind her, Elias's voice came low and easy. "Looks like red willows waking up for the season." Annabel turned. He stood in the doorway, lantern light spilling around him. His expression held no question, only a quiet acknowledgement of the choice she'd made. "Then I'd best learn its rhythm," she said. He tipped his hat, a trace of amusement in his eyes. "You're doing just fine, Miss Gray." The night wind rose, stirring the leaves, carrying the drumbeat farther off toward the square. Annabel felt its pull, half invitation, half challenge. She closed her eyes and let the sound settle in her pulse, unaware that it would soon lead her into the heart of the crowd and toward the first real test of her newfound courage. The morning of Founders' Day came clear and hot, the kind of Montana sun that made the paint on fences curl and children's laughter travel far. Red Willow had never looked so alive. Flags hung from every porch rail, and women in calico dresses hurried between stalls with baskets of pies and jars of jam. The air was thick with the scent of dust, sugar, and excitement. Zora insisted everyone from Juniper House go. "It's not about speeches," she told Annabel as she pinned a ribbon to her hat. "It's about showing the town we belong here, same as anyone else." Annabel dressed in a pale blue cotton gown, borrowed from one of Zora's trunks. It fit well enough, though the color felt too bright against her cautious heart. When she stepped outside, Elias was waiting. Coat brushed clean, a ribbon pinned to his vest too. White and navy, colors of the Ranchers Guild. "You look ready for a festival," he said, voice low, eyes warm. "And you," she replied, smiling before she meant to. Down by the square, a brass band from Miles City tuned their instruments, the clatter of drums mingling with the squeak of wagon wheels. Micah darted ahead, clutching a folded paper. He was to read the day's welcome, a task that had him proud and terrified in equal measure. When they reached the bandstand, the crowd was already thick. Miners with shirts rolled to the elbow, merchants in pressed suits, farmers in their Sunday best. The mayor, Silas Pike, stood near the front, his silver watch chain glinting in the sun. His smile was polite but fixed, a man used to seeing his name printed first. Micah climbed the steps, paper shaking in his hands. Annabel caught his eye and nodded gently. "You don't have to read for all of them," she whispered as he passed. "Just pick one face and speak to it." He took a breath, eyes finding hers again before turning to the crowd. His voice wavered, then steadied, each word carrying like a bright note through the heat. When he finished, applause broke out, louder than he'd expected. The boy grinned, his fear melting into pride. Zora clapped the loudest. Elias touched the brim of his hat, his quiet approval saying more than words. After the speeches came the music, a quick-tempo waltz that rolled through the square like wind over grass. Couples filled the space between stalls and flags. Annabel stood aside, content to watch. She hadn't danced since Boston, and back then, it had always felt like a performance. Elias appeared beside her, hand out, palm up. "One turn," he said. "I haven't. You'll remember," he murmured. She placed her hand in his. His grip was warm, sure, and the world around them seemed to hush for a moment as the band began another tune, slower this time. They moved carefully at first, her steps hesitant, his steady and guiding. The rhythm came back, faint but familiar, the way her father used to hum waltz patterns under his breath while tuning the piano. Elias smiled when she found the beat. "Told you," he said softly. They danced near the edge of the crowd, away from the noise. Around them, laughter swelled, children chased ribbons, The brass glinted in sunlight. For a brief moment, the loneliness that had shadowed Annabel since the depot simply loosened. Then came the shift, so small, so quiet, she almost missed it. A few townsfolk nearby had gone silent. Their eyes lingered too long on the pair turning slow in the dust. The black rancher and the woman not from here. No words were said, but she felt the weight of it. The invisible line drawn between belonging and intrusion. Elias noticed. His steps didn't falter. He guided her through one more turn, the faintest smile still on his lips, but his jaw was set. When the song ended, he bowed slightly, letting her hand fall with careful respect. "Don't let them decide what the music means," he said. "I won't," she whispered, though her throat felt tight. From across the square, Silas Pike's voice boomed, calling for attention. He congratulated the town on another year of progress, his speech gliding easily into talk of prosperity and growth. Behind the practiced charm, something colder lived in his eyes, ambition sharp enough to cut. Elias watched, expression unreadable. "That man talks about water like he owns it," he muttered. "Doesn't he?" Annabel asked. "Not yet," Elias said, "but he's working at it." The mayor's words rolled on, each one drawing the crowd tighter into his vision of control. Annabel followed Elias's gaze toward the distant hills where the pill, level, moderate. Wapiti River shimmered faintly in the sun, a river that meant life for every ranch and farm in the valley. Micah tugged her sleeve. "Miss Gray, did you hear? They're planning fireworks tonight." She forced a smile. "That sounds wonderful." But her thoughts lingered on the tension she had seen in Elias's face. The same quiet worry mirrored in Zora's eyes when Silas mentioned new water agreements. Something about it prickled the calm air, like the smell of smoke before a storm. As the crowd began to scatter for lunch and games, Elias turned to her. "There's more coming," he said, half to himself. "You can feel it in the wind." Annabel followed his gaze toward the distant line of cottonwoods marking the river. The sunlight there seemed too bright, the air too still. Behind them, a sudden gust tugged the ribbon from her hat, sending it spinning into the sky. Elias caught it just before it hit the ground and tucked it carefully into her hand. "For luck," he said. She smiled, though her stomach tightened with something she couldn't yet name. In the distance, thunder rumbled where no clouds yet showed. The storm was coming, though no one in Red Willow could yet see its edge. The next morning carried a different kind of silence. The smell of rain had faded, leaving only dust, and the faint tang of iron in the air. Elias saddled his horse before dawn, the steady creak of leather breaking the stillness. Annabel watched from the porch, her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. "Silas Pike asked for a meeting," he said quietly. "Down by Wapiti Crossing." Her fingers tightened on the railing. "Is it about the river?" Elias gave a single nod. "He wants signatures, says it's progress. But what it means is control." Zora stepped out with 2 tin cups of coffee. "You don't owe him your land, Eli," she said. "I know," he answered. But I owe the truth to the folks who depend on that water. I'll hear what he's selling before I refuse it. He swung into the saddle, his shadow long across the yard. Annabel wanted to speak, something, anything, but all she managed was, "Be careful." He met her gaze, a small half-smile softening the tension in his jaw. "Always am." Then he rode out, hooves dull against the packed earth, fading toward the horizon. By mid-morning the sun burned white over the valley. The Wapiti River ran swift and bright between banks of dry grass, its surface catching glints of light like glass. Silas Pike waited near the crossing, his fine horse restless beneath him, a polished cane in his hand, though he didn't need it. Two men from the town council lingered nearby, faces unreadable. "Mr. Booker," Silas greeted, all smooth civility. "Glad you could make the time." "River feeds every ranch from here to Red Willow," Elias replied. "Figured I ought to be here if someone aims to divide it." Silas smiled thinly. "Not divide, friend. Organize. Progress requires order. If the ranchers sign this agreement, I'll oversee fair distribution. No more disputes. Everyone wins." Elias dismounted, dust rising around his boots. "And you take a fee, I imagine." "A modest one," Silas said. "For the town's growth, of course. A man like you should appreciate efficiency." Elias's jaw tightened. "What I appreciate is fairness. You fence the river today. Who drinks tomorrow?" The wind shifted, carrying the scent of river reeds and distant smoke. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Then Silas leaned slightly forward in the saddle. "You'd best consider what side you're on, Booker. The tide's moving west, and it won't wait for anyone stuck in old notions of equality." Elias's gaze didn't waver. "Water doesn't belong to whoever talks the loudest." Silas's smile faltered. Just a flicker. "You sound like a man who's forgotten his place." "Maybe I just learned it," Elias said evenly. "Right here, on this side of the river." For a breath, the world went still, the river whispering, wind brushing through dry grass. Then Silas turned his horse sharply. "You'll regret this," he said, and rode off, the two councilmen following in uneasy silence. Elias remained by the water, watching the current twist and shimmer. The reflection of the sky shifted across its surface, fractured and restless. He saw himself there, and for a heartbeat, another face. The boy he'd been once, standing on another riverbank, shouting for a brother who never surfaced. The memory hit like a cold blade. He closed his eyes, forcing the image away. When he finally turned back toward the trail, clouds had gathered above the hills, gray and heavy. He could smell the promise of another storm. By the time he reached Red Willow, dusk had fallen. The town lights blinked alive one by one, small stars against the rising dark. Annabel met him at the gate, her face drawn with worry. "Well?" she asked. "He offered chains dressed as opportunity," Elias said, dismounting. "I told him no." Zora appeared behind her, hands on her hips. "Then he'll try another way. Silas doesn't lose easy." "I'll be ready," Elias said, though his eyes drifted toward the distant sound of the river, still running fast beyond the ridge. The question is, will the town stand with us when he comes? Annabel laid a hand on his arm, gentle but certain. They will, she said. They just need someone to remind them who they are. He looked at her then, really looked. The woman who'd arrived with nothing but a letter and a broken promise, standing steady in the fading light. Something eased in his chest. Maybe that someone's you, he said. She smiled faintly. We'll see. The wind shifted again, cooler now, carrying a low, rolling growl from the west. Thunder. Far, but moving closer. Elias glanced toward the horizon. Storm's coming, he murmured. Annabel followed his gaze. Then we'd best get the lamps ready. Behind them, in the growing dark, the first drop of rain struck the porch rail, spreading slow and wide like a warning, and the storm began to breathe. Morning came gray and restless. The storm had passed, but left the sky bruised and heavy, the kind of light that made everything seem as if it were waiting for something it couldn't name. Elias was already in the yard, mending the south fence line where last night's wind had loosened the posts. Annabel brought him coffee, steam curling into the cool air. You were out before sunrise, she said. Couldn't sleep, he answered, driving a nail clean through the board. Wind kept talking. She smiled softly. And what did it say? That we'll need everyone's help before long. From the porch, Zora's voice carried. Then you'll get it. There's not a soul in Red Willow who doesn't drink from that river. By mid-morning, the quiet house filled with motion. Zora organized ledgers, Elias worked the fence, and Annabel sat with Micah at the table, teaching him to read from a worn hymn book. The boy stumbled through the words, tongue tripping over grace and mercy, but his grin grew wide when he reached the end of a verse without help. You're getting it, Annabel said. He looked up. I like when you read. You make the words sound like they matter. They do, she said gently. Even the small ones. Outside, Bluebell whickered from the paddock. The mare's leg had healed, though she still startled at sudden noise. Annabel carried a handful of oats to her, moving slow. Easy, girl, she murmured. It's just me. Bluebell's ears twitched. The horse lowered her head slightly, and Annabel reached out, brushing her fingers along the smooth line of its neck. The animal tensed, then released a long sigh that sounded almost human. Elias watched from the fence. She trusts you, he said. I'm not sure, Annabel replied. Maybe she just recognizes another creature trying to stand steady. He smiled at that. Faint, but real. That's trust enough for a start. As the day wore on, the air grew thick again, humming with the coming change. In town, rumors spread fast. Silas Pike planning new wells on his land, talking of private rights, hinting at raising water prices for those level, moderate, less equipped to dig their own. By evening, Zora gathered them around the kitchen table. He means to starve us out slow, she said. But we've got time if we're smart. Elias leaned back, the chair creaking. The land's not his to carve up. Folks just need to remember that. Zora nodded. Then we remind them. Start with the ones who've lost most. The Blackfoot seamstress, old Mr. Cortez from the forge, and Pastor Reed. They'll listen. Annabel looked between them. You want to call a meeting? Not a meeting, Zora said. A promise. If we stand together, he can't divide us. Elias's gaze lingered on the window. The last light had gone soft and gold over the hills, and the smell of rain lingered like a memory. We'll need every hand, he murmured, even the quiet ones. Later, when the others had gone to rest, Annabel sat alone by the lamp, balancing the household books. The numbers were tidy, the ink steady, yet her thoughts wandered. To the river, to the mayor's pale smile, to the way Elias's voice had carried a tremor when he mentioned the wind. She sensed something deeper haunted him, a story buried beneath years of silence. A soft knock startled her. Micah peeked in, holding out a folded scrap of paper. Zora says this came from the post, he said. From where? San Francisco, I think. Her chest tightened before she even opened it. The handwriting was familiar, careful and sure. Nathan Hale, the man whose promises had sent her west. She thanked the boy and waited until he'd gone. For a long time she only stared at the envelope, turning it between her fingers as if the paper might burn through her skin. Finally, she tore it open. The letter was brief, an apology, a story of failure spun thin, a new proposal wrapped in regret. I still think of you, Annabel. I can make things right now. Come back. The city is brighter than ever, and I have a place for you here. Her hands trembled as she folded it shut. The words felt empty, the way the depot had felt empty that first day. Noise without warmth, promise without soul. She rose and crossed to the window. Outside, the lanterns, along the road, flickered in the wind. Somewhere in the dark, Bluebell shifted restlessly. She pressed the letter flat on the sill and looked up at the night sky. The stars were sharp and cold. The sound of the wind moving through the juniper trees whispered something that almost sounded like "stay." From the yard came Elias's voice, calling softly to his horse. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone held a steadiness she hadn't heard in years. A man who meant what he said, even when he said little. Annabel turned the letter once more, then began to fold it, small and neat, until it was no bigger than a coin. From her sewing kit, she pulled a scrap of paper and shaped it into a small boat, slipping the letter inside. It sat there on the windowsill, fragile and waiting. The house settled around her, timbers creaking with the night wind. She blew out the lamp and lay down, eyes open in the dark. Somewhere far off, thunder murmured again, and outside the little paper boat trembled in the breeze, as though testing the air before the rain. The storm hadn't ended. It was only gathering its breath. By the second day, the air had turned close and heavy. Clouds gathered low over the valley, gray and swollen, pressing down on Red Willow like a held breath. The smell of rain came first, wet sage, iron, and the faint sweetness of cottonwood. Annabel stood by the window in her small upstairs room, watching the paper boat on the sill tremble in the rising wind. The letter inside it felt weightless now, hollow of meaning. She thought of Nathan's words, "Come back. I can make things right," and wondered when right had ever meant belonging. Downstairs, the house stirred with ordinary life. Zora was kneading bread, her voice carrying a half-tune. Micah read aloud from his lesson book, tripping over syllables, laughing at his own mistakes. From outside came the measured rhythm of Elias's hammer against the fence post. The sounds layered into a fragile kind of peace, simple, human, real. Annabel touched the paper boat one last time, then left it there and went to help Zora in the kitchen. "You hear that sky?" Zora asked, glancing up. "She's got something to say tonight." Annabel smiled faintly. "Then we'd best listen." By mid-afternoon, the light had gone strange, gold washed with silver, edges blurred by mist. The wind picked up, carrying bits of hay and the smell of faraway thunder. Elias came in from the yard, wiping sweat and dust from his brow. "Fence'll hold," he said, "long as the creek doesn't rise too fast." Zora poured him water. "And if it does? Then we pray the low ground stays quiet." Annabel studied his face, the calm that wasn't indifference, the quiet that held its own kind of strength. She had seen that steadiness before, at the depot, in the way he'd offered her a ticket without asking a single thing. "You've seen a flood before," she said softly. Elias looked at her for a moment, then nodded. "A long time ago. River back home came up overnight. Took more than it should have." His voice roughened at the edge, then gentled again. "Water remembers where it's been." Outside, thunder rolled closer, a long, low sound that seemed to shake the bones of the house. Zora began, lighting lamps, though it wasn't yet dark. "I'll tie down the shutters," she said. "Micah, get the candles." Annabel followed Elias to the porch. The wind tugged at her hair, warm and wet. Across the fields, the sky hung low, torn open with light. "She's coming fast," Elias murmured. "Can we do anything?" "Hold steady," he said, "and stay near the high ground." They worked together in silence, securing doors, bringing in the tools, leading the horses into the barn. Bluebell stamped nervously, the whites of her eyes flashing. Annabel laid a hand on the mare's neck, whispering softly. "Breathe slow," she said, more to herself than the animal. "Just breathe slow." The first drops hit before dusk, hard, cold, deliberate. Then the rain came all at once, a roaring curtain that blurred the horizon. The ground darkened underfoot. Puddles turned to streams. Inside, lamps flickered against the storm's rhythm. Zora stirred a pot on the stove, humming under her breath, but her eyes flicked to the window more often than to the food. Micah sat near the fire, knees drawn up, watching the shadows move. Elias checked the door again, his jaw tight. "Water's rising fast," he said. "If the lower fence gives, the horses'll spook." Annabel felt her heartbeat quicken. "What can I do?" He looked at her, rain dripping from his hair. "Keep that lantern burning. Sometimes that's the difference between lost and found. She nodded, gripping the handle of the oil lamp. The light wavered as the wind howled through the cracks. For a while there was only sound, the rain beating, the timbers creaking, the far-off rumble of water swelling where the land dipped low. Then, through the storm, came another noise, a frantic whinny from the barn. Elias was already moving. "Bluebell," he said, voice sharp. "I'll come," Annabel blurted. He turned to stop her, but she was already at the door, lamp raised, the rain slashing across her face. They ran together through the storm, boots sinking in mud, lightning cracking open the sky above them. The barn loomed ahead, half-shadowed, half-lit by the flashes of light. Inside, Bluebell thrashed, against the stall, eyes wide, foam at her mouth. The rope had come loose. Elias grabbed for the halter, trying to calm her. The mare kicked, wild with fear. Annabel stepped forward, lamp trembling in her hand. "Elias," she said, voice shaking, "let me." He hesitated. She met his gaze. "I know how to breathe with her." Then she stepped close, the lamplight spilling over the trembling horse, over her own rain-soaked face. "Easy, Bluebell," she whispered. "It's just the wind, just the water talking." She slowed her breathing, matching it to the horse's, quiet and steady. For a long heartbeat, nothing changed. Then Bluebell's eyes softened, her muscles eased, her head lowered by an inch, then two. The storm raged outside, but in that small circle of light, stillness grew. Elias watched her, chest rising with something between pride and awe. "You've got her," he said. Annabel nodded once. "We've got each other." Thunder rolled again, closer now, shaking the ground beneath them. Outside, the creek roared louder, spilling toward the yard. Elias looked toward the open door, rain slanting in sideways. "We need to brace the fence before it gives." Annabel met his eyes, understanding the fear he didn't speak, the river that once took, the boy he couldn't save. "We'll do it together," she said softly. The wind tore at the roof. The lamp flickered. Somewhere behind them, the paper boat in her window had already begun to soften, the ink bleeding into the folds, like a name washing away. Outside, the storm kept its promise, to remember everything the world tried to forget. The storm had a voice now. It screamed through the gaps in the barn roof, slapped the walls with sheets of rain, tore at the hinges like a living thing. Elias and Annabel stood side by side in the doorway, soaked to the bone, staring into the black field where the fence line was already vanishing beneath the flood. "Creeks come over," Elias said, raising his voice above the wind. "If the gate breaks, the lower pen will go with it." "We can't let the horses loose in this," Annabel answered. Lightning cracked close enough to blind her for a second. The world flashed white, then sank again into shadow. Elias grabbed a coil of rope from the wall. "I'll tie the posts. Keep the lamp high." "I'm coming with you." "You're not—" But she was already out the door, her skirt plastered to her legs, the lamplight swinging wild in her hand. Mud sucked at her boots, rain stabbing her skin. Elias swore under his breath and followed. They waded through rising water toward the lower field. The fence trembled under the push of the flood, each post groaning like an old bone. Elias fought to knot the rope, his fingers numb, his breath harsh. "Micah!" he shouted toward the house. "Stay inside." But the answer that came back was faint and terrified. "Elias!" And much too close. The boy was already out there, halfway between house and pen, small and stumbling in the dark. The current from the swollen creek had found its path through the yard, shallow but swift. "God!" Elias hissed, throwing down the rope. He plunged forward, boots vanishing in the churn. Annabel dropped the lamp to the higher rail and followed, the flame wavering, threatening to die. "Micah!" she called. "Don't move!" The boy turned toward her voice, eyes wide with fear. The ground beneath him gave, and he fell with a cry, water swallowing him to the waist. Elias reached him first, grabbing the back of his shirt, dragging him clear of the deepest run. The effort tore his breath away. For a moment, he froze, because the sound of rushing water, the grip of it, the helpless pull, all of it came back too sharp, too real. The boy he'd lost years ago flashed before him. Dark water, a reaching hand, silence, pitch first. "Elias!" Annabel's voice cut through the storm. She was beside him now, one hand steadying Micah, the other gripping Elias's sleeve. "Look at me!" He did. "Breathe," she said. "Slow. We're here. We're alive." Her voice held the same calm she had given to Bluebell, steady and rhythmic, more powerful than any command. He matched her breath without thinking, one inhale at a time, until the panic drained from his limbs. Together, they guided Micah toward the barn, the boy coughing, but safe. Inside, Zora met them at the door, face streaked with rain and fear. She gathered Micah into her arms, whispering thanks under her breath. Elias sank against the wall, chest heaving. Annabel crouched beside him, hair dripping, eyes searching his face. "You saved him," she said softly. Elias shook his head. "No. You did." They sat there in the trembling light of the lantern, the storm raging around them. For a long while neither spoke. The world had narrowed to breath and heartbeat, the sound of rain on the roof, the warmth of survival between them. When the wind shifted, Annabel rose and crossed to Bluebell's stall. The mare stamped nervously, eyes rolling. "It's all right, girl," Annabel murmured. "It's just the thunder." She reached up, laying her palm against the animal's cheek, breathing slow until Bluebell's head lowered, the tremors easing. Behind her, Elias watched, his hands still shaking, but something else moving in his chest. Awe, and maybe hope. "You've got more courage than most men I've known," he said quietly. She turned back to him, wet hair clinging to her face. "I only learned to breathe from someone who never stopped trying." He looked down, rain dripping from his chin, and almost smiled. "Maybe we both just needed reminding." A gust tore through the open slats of the barn, snuffing the smaller lamp. The last one flickered weakly, light wavering across their faces. Outside, the floodwater hammered the walls, then began to fall back, slow and reluctant, as the storm started to drift east. Zora wrapped a blanket around Micah and led him toward the house, her voice steady again. "Come morning, we'll see what's left to fix." Annabel and Elias stayed a while, longer, listening to the rain ease into silence. The lamp hissed, then went dark. In the blackness, there was only the rhythm of their breathing, slow, even, shared. Elias's voice came from somewhere close. "When the river rose before, I thought it took everything worth keeping." Annabel's hand found his in the dark. "Maybe it brought you here instead." He didn't answer, but his fingers closed around hers, firm and sure. And for the first time since he was a boy, he let the sound of water pass without fear. Outside, the storm gave its last sigh. Inside, in the quiet that followed, two heartbeats found the same pace. And Red Willow slept, washed clean by the kind of storm that leaves nothing untouched and takes nothing undeserved. Morning came pale and quiet, the world washed raw by the storm. Mist drifted low across the meadow, and every blade of grass glittered with dew. The river still murmured somewhere beyond the ridge, slower now, tamed but not forgotten. Annabel woke to the smell of damp wood and coffee. From the porch, she could see Elias already outside, sleeves rolled, inspecting the fence. His movements were steady again, measured, sure. Each swing of the hammer carried not urgency, but patience. Zora was at the stove, stirring oatmeal. Micah, wrapped in a blanket, dozed near the hearth. "He'll be all right," Zora said quietly, seeing Annabel's glance. "Children bend easier than grown folks." Annabel smiled faintly. "He was brave last night." Zora looked up from the pot, eyes soft but direct. "So were you." Annabel said nothing. She poured coffee into 2 mugs and carried one outside. Elias turned when she approached. The morning sun caught on his damp hair, tracing silver through the dark strands. He took the cup with a nod. "Fence held better than I thought," he said. "You held better than I thought." "I just kept breathing," she replied. "Like you taught me." He looked at her then, not with surprise, but with quiet understanding. "Maybe you were the teacher this time." They stood for a moment, the silence between them filled only by the steady hum of waking earth. Then Annabel reached into her coat pocket. The folded letter was still there, edges soft and frayed from rain. She turned it in her hand, sunlight catching on the faint bleed of ink. "He wrote that he could make things right again," she said, almost to herself. "But I don't think he ever knew what right meant." Elias didn't interrupt. Annabel knelt by the porch step where Zora's fire bucket still smoldered. She fed the letter to the flame. It caught quick, curling into itself, words twisting into ash. For a moment, the smoke smelled of ink and salt, then of nothing at all. When it was done, she brushed the ashes from her palm and looked up. "I think I'd like to stay a while longer," she said. Elias's answer was a small, certain smile, Good, he said simply. He motioned for her to follow. There's something I want to show you. They rode out past the orchard, the earth soft beneath the horses' hooves. The morning light opened wide over the valley, turning every puddle into a patch of silver. When they crested the western hill, Annabel saw it, a half-framed house standing alone among the grasses, the beams catching light like the bones of a promise. It's not much yet, Elias said, dismounting. But the ground's solid. I've been raising it between seasons. Whose home will it be? She asked. He hesitated, then said, I figured it could be anyone's who helps finish it. She looked at him, catching the quiet under his words. And if I stay? Then it won't just be a house, he said. It'll have a heartbeat. The wind rose softly, rippling the grasses around them. Annabel closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in the scent of wet wood, of clean air after loss. She thought of her father's hands on piano keys, of the warmth of Juniper House, of Bluebell's steady breath against her palm. When she opened her eyes, the world seemed to fit differently around her. Elias had set his hat aside, hammer hanging loosely from his hand. Would you play something? He asked suddenly. She blinked. There's no piano here. Then make the air remember, he said, his voice low, earnest. Annabel smiled at that, an unguarded, gentle curve of her lips that surprised them both. I might manage that. That evening, back at Juniper House, she opened the long-neglected case that held her father's violin. The wood gleamed faintly, darkened by years of quiet. She tuned it slowly, the strings sighing under her fingers, then lifted it to her shoulder. The first note came soft and unsure, trembling like something newly born. The second found its footing. The third carried the room. The sound filled the house, spilled through open windows, climbed into the dusk. Zora paused in the doorway, smiling. Micah sat cross-legged on the floor, listening wide-eyed. Elias stood outside beneath the porch light, hands in his pockets, head tilted slightly as if afraid to disturb the moment. The melody was simple, a tune of homecoming, of roads closing behind and opening ahead. Each note felt like breath made, visible. When she finished, the silence that followed felt holy. You've given this place its sound, Elias said. No, Annabel answered softly. This place gave me back my voice. For a while they said nothing. The lamps glowed warm, the river murmured beyond the fields, and the faint smell of smoke from the burned letter lingered, not bitter now, but clean. Inside, Micah began humming the tune she had played. Zora's laughter followed, soft as wind through leaves. Elias turned to Annabel, his voice roughened but certain. The council meets tomorrow. Zora says the papers for the water agreement are ready. Maybe it's time we sign something for all of us. Annabel nodded. Then let's make it more than ink, she said. Let's make it a promise. They stood side by side at the edge of the porch, watching fireflies blink across the wet grass, their light flickering in rhythm with the quiet thrum of her heart. Somewhere far off, The river sighed against its banks, not threatening now, but steady, like a song keeping time. And above it all, the faint hum of her father's melody lingered in the air, threading through the night like smoke that knew its way home. Home wasn't a place anymore. It was a sound, a promise, a heartbeat that kept time with her own. The sun rose clean and high that morning, as if the land itself wanted to begin again. Dew still clung to the porch rails when Elias hitched the wagon. Annabel stood beside him, sleeves rolled, hair pinned back in a loose knot. She carried a ledger pressed to her chest, the same one she used to balance Juniper House's accounts, now filled with notes for something far larger. "Ready?" Elias asked. "As I'll ever be," she replied. Zora and Micah climbed into the back, carrying baskets of bread and apples. "In case the meeting runs longer than words can stand," Zora had said with a wry smile. The road into town was half dry, the wheels leaving soft grooves in the mud. Along the way, they passed neighbors heading the same direction. The blacksmith from Willow Crossing, Father Miguel from the mission, two ranch hands leading their horses on foot. For once, everyone seemed to be moving toward one thing, instead of away from something else. Red Willow's main street glowed beneath the new light. Dust rose with each footstep, soft and golden. At the edge of the square, the small town hall waited, a plain building of timber and brick, its flag stirring lazily in the breeze. Inside, the air smelled of ink and sun-warmed paper. A long table stretched across the room, half filled already. Faces turned when they entered, curious, cautious, but not unkind. Silas Pike stood by the window, immaculate as always, his silver watch chain catching the light. "Morning, Booker," he said evenly. "Heard you weathered the storm all right." Elias met his gaze, unreadable. "We did." Silas's smile thinned. Not everyone was so lucky. Low fields flooded. Some folks think maybe a new dam upstream would keep that from happening again. Annabel felt the shift in the room, the quiet crackle of tension. But Zora stepped forward, her posture straight, her voice calm. "Or maybe the river's been patient long enough. Maybe we try sharing before we start walling her in." A murmur of agreement rippled among the gathered neighbors. Father Miguel nodded. The blacksmith crossed his arms and said, "Fair's fair." Silas's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. Zora unrolled a sheet of parchment across the table, the draft of the new water covenant. The ink gleamed dark and wet in the morning light. "Pitch first. This is the work of every hand that tills or builds or teaches on this land," she said. "Each signature here means the wells, the river, and the rain belong to all, not one." Elias stepped closer, reading the lines carefully. The simple words carried the weight of decades: to share the water, to guard it, and to never let thirst divide us. Zora held out the pen. "Someone's got to start it." Elias hesitated only a moment, then took the pen. His hand was steady as he signed, Elias Booker. The room was still for a heartbeat. Then the blacksmith came forward, followed by Father Miguel, then a woman with braids streaked silver. the seamstress from the Blackfeet settlement north of town. One by one, the names filled the page. Annabel watched the ink bloom and dry, her heart swelling with quiet pride. When Zora turned toward her, she understood what came next. "You'll keep the records," Zora said softly. "That ledger of yours, it's already got more honesty in it than most ledgers in this territory." Annabel stepped forward. Her fingers trembled slightly as she wrote her name beneath the others. Annabel Gray. When she lifted the pen, she met Silas Pike's eyes. The man gave a faint, polite nod, but his mouth was set hard. "Looks like the tide's changed," he said, almost to himself. "About time," Elias answered. Outside, the bell from the small church rang noon. The townspeople began to drift out, some talking, some silent, but all walking lighter. On the steps, Zora handed out bread from her basket. Children chased each other through the square. Micah stood by the wagon, holding the signed covenant like something precious. Elias leaned against the post, hat tipped low, watching the crowd scatter. "Never thought I'd see a day folks agreed on anything around here," he said. Annabel smiled. "You just had to wait for a storm to wash them clean first." He looked at her then, sunlight in his eyes. "Storm cleaned me, too." The words hung between them, simple, unadorned, more truth than he'd spoken in years. Annabel touched the folded covenant in her hands. "Then maybe this is where it starts. Not just for the town, but for us." Elias's voice was low. "You mean staying?" She nodded. "I think I stopped running the moment I stayed that first night at Juniper House." Zora's laughter carried across the steps. "If you two are done talking circles, help me load this bread before the flies claim it." They obeyed, laughter mingling with the noise of the town, the soft clatter of wagon wheels beginning to move again. As they turned onto the road home, Annabel glanced back once at the town hall. The parchment hung in the window now, sunlight passing clean through it. On the glass, two reflections overlapped, hers and Elias's, faint but steady, as if already carved into the day. By the time they reached the ridge, the wind had shifted west, carrying the scent of cut hay and far-off rain. "Looks like another storm building," Elias said. Annabel smiled, resting her hand over his on the reins. "Then we'll meet it the same way. Together." He didn't answer, but his thumb brushed over her knuckles. Wordless agreement written in touch instead of speech. Behind them, the town hall bell rang once more, deep and round, echoing over the valley like a heartbeat shared by everyone who'd signed. The sound followed them all the way home. And for the first time, Red Willow wasn't just a town. It was a promise kept in ink and in love that chose to stay. 2 years later, the valley bloomed again. Riverlight Ranch lay quiet beneath a soft spring sun. The grass high and silver green, the river calm after every storm. Annabel sat on the porch, her daughter June in her lap, a small, laughing bundle with curls dark as rain-soaked soil. Each giggle felt like sunlight finding its way through leaves. Down by the corral, Elias worked with Bluebell, now slower but still proud, a young colt prancing at her side. The sound of their hooves was steady, like the rhythm of a heart that had learned peace. Micah hammered a sign by the new schoolhouse, Riverlight School. He waved, his grin wide, his shirt half untucked. Zora came from the garden carrying a basket of early pears, her silver hair shining in the light. "If he's teaching arithmetic," she teased, "we'd better pray for the children." Annabel laughed, shading her eyes to watch Elias. When he turned, his smile reached her before his words did. "Never thought quiet could sound like this." "It's what happens," she said, "when a place finally forgives its storms." He climbed the steps, took June from her arms, and the baby reached for his face, cooing. "She's got your stubbornness," he said. "She's got your calm," Annabel answered. "Maybe that's all we ever needed." Evening deepened. The lamps glowed warm behind the windows. Micah's violin carried faintly through the air. Beyond the ridge, the train's whistle drifted soft and far. No longer a call to leave, just a song returning home. Annabel leaned into Elias, the baby asleep between them. "Do you hear that?" she murmured. "What?" he asked. "The world," she said. "It's breathing again." He nodded, pressing his lips to her hair. "Then let's breathe with it." They stood together under the wide Montana sky, where every star felt close enough to touch. The wind carried the scent of snow, the promise of another season. Annabel smiled into the quiet. No fear, no past left to chase. Only the steady warmth of the man beside her, and the land that had finally called her by name. As the story of Annabel and Elias comes to rest under the wide Montana sky, we're reminded that some journeys don't end where we planned. They end where the heart finally feels at home. Their love wasn't loud or rushed, but steady, built in the quiet moments of trust, kindness, and second chances. It's the kind of love that many of us still believe in, the kind that grows stronger with time, weather, and forgiveness. If this tale touched you, if it reminded you of the old days when love meant keeping your word and standing by someone through every storm, we'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts or memories in the comments. Your stories matter here. If you enjoyed spending time in Red Willow, please give this video a like and consider subscribing so you don't miss our next Western love story. A new chapter filled with warmth, faith, and the spirit of the Old West. And don't forget to tap the notification bell so each new story finds its way straight to your porch light. Thank you for riding along with us. Until next time, may your coffee stay hot, your heart stay hopeful, and your trail always lead you home. Under the wide Montana sky, the wind carries one last sound, the echo of a love that learned how to stay.